12 Golden Age actresses who lost their beauty in the saddest ways the silver screen preserved them, at their most perfect, young, radiant, and immortal. For millions of viewers, Hollywood's Golden Age actresses were the definition of beauty itself. Faces larger than life, with glamour that apparently would last an eternity. But the cameras eventually stopped rolling, the spotlights dimmed, and these iconic women faced something far more devastating than any fictional drama they ever performed: the loss of the very beauty that had defined them. Today, we explore the heartbreaking stories of 12 legendary actresses whose stunning looks were stolen not just by time, but by tragedy, illness, addiction, mental health struggles, and desperate attempts to preserve what was slipping away. Some transformations happened gradually over decades. Others came with shocking suddenness. But each story reveals the cruel paradox at the heart of Hollywood, an industry that worshipped beauty while systematically destroying the women who possessed it. For Hollywood's most beautiful women, growing older meant watching their most precious professional asset dissolve under the merciless scrutiny of fans, critics, and studio executives who had built fortunes on their perfect faces. The psychological toll was immense. When your entire identity and livelihood are built around your appearance, what happens when that appearance fundamentally changes? How do you cope when the very quality that made you special, that made you you in the public's mind, begins to fade? The 12 women we are about to meet answered these questions in dramatically different ways. 1. Hedy Lamarr. When genius couldn't save beauty. When Hedy Lamarr arrived in Hollywood in the late 1930s, her beauty was so extraordinary that it seemed almost unreal, as if someone had painted a perfect face and then somehow brought it to life. With her symmetrical features, luminous skin, and hypnotic dark eyes, she wasn't just attractive. She was otherworldly. Louis B. Mayer promoted her as the most beautiful woman in the world, not as exaggeration, but as simple fact. Lamarr's beauty seemed almost mathematically engineered, and indeed mathematicians later noted that her facial proportions nearly aligned with the classical golden ratio. This was beauty that translated on screen to an almost hypnotic presence in films like Algiers, Samson and Delilah, and White Cargo. Co-stars would often feel upstaged by her without her saying a word. But behind her perfect face lay one of Hollywood's most brilliant minds. Lamarr was a self-taught inventor who co-developed a frequency-hopping technology to prevent Nazi interference with Allied torpedoes. This invention would later form the basis of GPS, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi. Yet, this extraordinary intellect remained hidden beneath her glamorous image, setting the stage for a tragic decline as she aged. As Lamarr entered her 40s and 50s, the industry that once worshipped her now turned away. Roles disappeared. Critics began making cruel comments about her aging face. Lamarr, whose sense of identity was inextricably linked to her appearance, felt destroyed. She turned to early, primitive cosmetic procedures that altered her features unnaturally. Eventually, she began performing amateur cosmetic work on herself, injecting substances and attempting minor surgical corrections. The results were disastrous. Her once perfect face became distorted, and by the 1970s, she had retreated completely from public view. She spent her final years in isolation, speaking mostly by phone, rarely letting anyone see her. Recognition of her genius came only at the end of her life, far too late to rewrite her story. Her brilliant mind endured, but she was imprisoned by the fading beauty that once defined her. 2. Rita Hayworth. When beauty loses its mind. If Hollywood had a single image of pure glamour, it was Rita Hayworth tossing back her iconic auburn hair in Gilda. She was the ultimate 1940s sex symbol, combining sensuality with a surprising vulnerability. Soldiers during World War II kept her photo in their lockers and submarines. Even into her 40s, her beauty remained dazzling. But behind the scenes, something far more devastating than aging was happening. In the late 1950s, Hayworth began forgetting lines, losing her place on set, and seeming confused. Everyone assumed it was stress, exhaustion, or alcohol. In reality, Rita Hayworth was developing early-onset Alzheimer's disease decades before the public understood the condition. As the disease continued to progress through the 1960s and 1970s, Hayworth's once bright expression slowly faded. Her movements became tentative. Her eyes, once expressive and full of life, now reflected confusion and fear. Gossip magazines keyed off the shots of her looking bloated or vacant with speculation about drinking or abuse of drugs. No one knew the truth. The disease also finally began to affect her appearance as she struggled with basic self-care. Her weight fluctuated, her features grew strained, and her expressions flattened. She began to look like a ghost of the woman she once was. The most heartbreaking detail came from her daughter. Hayworth often called repeatedly in the same day, panicked and confused, aware that something was terribly wrong, but unable to understand what. By the late 1970s, she barely recognized herself. Shown an old photograph during a rare lucid moment, she asked, "Who is that beautiful girl?" When told it was her, she did not believe it. Diagnosed officially in 1980, she spent her final years needing full-time care, unable to recognize family or comprehend her own legacy. Whereas other actresses lost beauty to time, Rita Hayworth lost the very mind that animated her beauty. Her decline remains one of the saddest stories in Hollywood history. 3. Gloria Grahame. The self-destructive pursuit of perfection. Gloria Grahame had a unique, unforgettable sensuality. With her pouty upper lip, smoky voice, and magnetic presence, she became one of film noir's most iconic femme fatale. But the very feature that made her distinct, her slightly pouty upper lip, became her obsession. Convinced it was a flaw, Grahame began tampering with it as early as the 1950s, first with cotton or tissue stuffed under the lip during filming, then with early, crude plastic surgery techniques. Because modern fillers didn't exist, Grahame sought multiple procedures from different doctors without coordination, and some reports suggest that she even attempted amateur enhancement herself. The results were increasingly disastrous. Her upper lip became swollen, stiff, and visibly scarred. It restricted her facial movement and even affected her speech. Cinematographers resorted to soft focus and strategic lighting to hide the damage. Despite their efforts, directors began refusing to cast her in major roles. By the 1960s and 1970s, the once sensual expression had hardened into something unnatural and unsettling. Critics wrote excoriating comments about her appearance, with some going as far as to say that she looked like she was permanently grimacing. Her career collapsed, and Grahame became deeply reclusive, meeting friends only in dark lighting where the damage to her face was less obvious. She refused photographs and rarely gave interviews. She died when she was 57 years old, and many obituaries blamed vanity as the cause for her downfall. The reality was far more tragic. She was a sensitive woman made insecure by an industry that wanted perfection yet punished the women who pursued it. 4. Veronica Lake, when the signature feature vanishes. Few actresses in Hollywood history were ever so completely defined by a single physical attribute as Veronica Lake. Her famous peekaboo hairstyle, long silky blonde waves cascading over one eye, was not just a fashion choice, it was a cultural sensation. Women across America copied it. Hairdressers were overwhelmed with requests, and the look became so iconic that it remains instantly recognizable decades later. But Lake's delicate beauty went beyond her hair. Standing just 4 feet 11 inches, with petite proportions, refined features, and a cool, mysterious screen presence, she became the quintessential noir star. In films like This Gun for Hire and The Blue Dahlia, often paired with Alan Ladd, she projected an image of untouchable elegance mixed with smoldering sensuality. Yet beneath that glamorous surface, Lake struggled with mounting personal and professional pressures. The stress of maintaining her image, combined with a turbulent marriage, difficult on-set relationships, and the relentless workflow of wartime Hollywood, took a growing toll. She began drinking, at first to calm her nerves, later developing a serious dependency that affected both her appearance and her career. The first sign of her decline came during World War II. Women working in factories were imitating her peekaboo hairstyle, but the long waves posed a dangerous hazard around machinery. The government asked Lake to publicly change her hairstyle to encourage safer practices. She agreed, cutting her famous hair for publicity photos. What the public didn't know was that the patriotic gesture conveniently masked a developing crisis. Lake was already suffering from severe hair loss caused by stress and nutritional deficiencies, and by years of harsh styling needed to maintain her trademark look. The haircut hid the early stages of stress-induced alopecia that was silently stripping away her most famous feature. The 1950s brought a catastrophic collapse. Bad marriages, financial ruin, and deepening alcoholism sent her on a downward spiral. Photos from this era show a woman barely recognizable as the cool, luminous noir star of a decade earlier. Her once smooth skin looked puffy and etched with lines. What remained of her blonde hair was dull and patchy. Most haunting was the change in her eyes. The mysterious, dreamy gaze that had defined her screen persona had given way to an exhausted, defiant glint. By the 1960s, Lake had reached bottom. Penniless, struggling with alcoholism and what many now believe was undiagnosed schizophrenia. She was discovered working incognito as a barmaid in a New York hotel. A reporter who tracked her down described her as a ghost, not of a person, but of beauty itself. When shown photos from her prime, Lake is said to have replied, "That was not me. That was never me." 5. Barbara Payton, Hollywood's most dramatic fall. Some beauty transformations unfold slowly over a lifetime. Others happen with such shocking speed and intensity that they become cautionary legends within Hollywood. No story exemplifies the latter more than Barbara Payton's catastrophic descent, from promising starlet to unrecognizable street prostitute, in what remains perhaps the most dramatic physical decline in film history. In the late 1940s, Payton arrived in Hollywood with the kind of beauty that turned heads mid-conversation. Platinum blonde hair, a voluptuous figure, and a face that blended sensuality with childlike innocence made her an instant standout. Studios saw enormous potential, and by 1950 she was under contract at Warner Brothers, starring alongside James Cagney and Gary Cooper. Producers described her as the face of an angel on the body of a goddess. Columnist Hedda Hopper wrote that Payton enters a room like a beautiful storm, impossible to ignore and dangerous to approach. Photographs from this period show flawless skin, symmetrical features, and a confident, luminous presence. But beneath her stunning exterior were deep-rooted personal issues that soon erupted into scandal. Payton became known for public drunkenness, violent altercations, and a chaotic love life, which culminated in a notorious love triangle with actors Frank Catone and Tom Neal. When Neal beat Tone so severely that he suffered a concussion and major facial injuries, the scandal destroyed Payton's career prospects. Hollywood studios tolerated many things, but public humiliation was not one of them. Warner Brothers immediately severed ties. Soon, no major studio would hire her. Forced into low-budget exploitation films and increasingly dependent on alcohol and drugs, Payton's physical transformation began. In 1967, after failed attempts at rehabilitation, Payton returned to her parents' home in San Diego. Neighbors who once admired her beauty couldn't recognize the bloated, broken woman she had become. She died that same year at age 39, officially from heart and liver failure. Her body was as destroyed as her once glorious face. 6. Marlene Dietrich, the illusion that couldn't last. No actress better understood the power of image than Marlene Dietrich. From the moment she mesmerized audiences in The Blue Angel in 1930, Dietrich perfected the art of visual transformation. With sculpted cheekbones, arched eyebrows, and a knowing, seductive gaze, she constructed one of the most iconic images of glamour in cinema history. Unlike studio-made starlets, Dietrich carefully constructed her own appearance. She collaborated with cinematographers, insisting on specific lighting setups, and controlled every detail of her presentation. "I dress for the image," she said. Not for herself, not for men, not for fashion. This mastery of self-illusion made her uniquely prepared to handle aging, or so it seemed. But the same perfectionism eventually became a trap. She was utterly unable to tolerate any transformation that strayed from perfection as she moved through her 50s and 60s. Instead of maturing into a beautiful older woman, she employed a series of extreme measures to retain the image of her youth. What had begun as calculated lighting and strategic makeup transmogrified into painful, theatrical attempts at physical preservation. According to her daughter Maria Riva, Dietrich used surgical tape tucked under wigs to pull the skin so tight that at times she couldn't fully close either her eyes or mouth. The elaborate wigs, tightly bound corsets, and padding kept her figure intact. Each layer encased one more barrier between her real self and the image she needed the world to see. Her relationship with photography also changed. Once a woman who mastered the camera, she became terrified of being photographed without complete control. She allowed photos only under rigid conditions, specific angles, controlled lights, heavy preparation. This became nearly impossible to enforce as paparazzi culture exploded in the 1950s and 1960s. In 1975, after a fall during a performance in Sydney left her with a broken leg, photographers captured unguarded images of her being carried into an ambulance. For the first time, the public saw her not as an icon, but as an elderly, vulnerable woman. The publication of these photos devastated Dietrich and contributed to her decision to withdraw completely from public life. From 1980 until her death in 1992, Dietrich lived as a recluse in her Paris apartment. She refused all visitors except caregivers and a few family members. She removed mirrors from her home. She communicated mainly through letters and never allowed herself to be photographed again. Those few who did see her in her final years described an elderly woman bearing almost no resemblance to the glamorous figure she had once portrayed. The famous cheekbones had softened, the perfect posture had bent, and the knowing gaze had lost its spark. Without the illusion she had spent a lifetime maintaining, she looked exactly her age. Yet, in the public imagination, Dietrich remains forever frozen in perfection. By choosing disappearance over imperfection, she preserved her legend at the cost of her freedom. She controlled every angle, one biographer wrote, until there were none left. Her tragedy was one of her own making, a woman so committed to illusion that it became impossible for her to live without it. 7. Elizabeth Taylor, when the violet eyes dimmed. If Hollywood ever produced a perfect beauty, it may have been Elizabeth Taylor in her prime. With rare violet eyes, flawless features, and a voluptuous figure, she seemed almost unreal. In films like National Velvet, A Place in the Sun, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, she set a standard few could hope to approach. Even candid photos captured the same breathtaking beauty seen on screen, proof that her appearance was not merely the work of lighting or makeup. Richard Burton, who married her twice, said her face was so perfect that even the flaws were perfect. But the same extraordinary natural beauty made her later life transformation especially heartbreaking. Unlike actresses whose decline was largely attributed to lifestyle choices or cosmetic excesses, Taylor's changing appearance was tied to serious health problems that began early. Chronic back problems, stemming from an accident on the set of National Velvet when she was 12, haunted her throughout her adulthood. Multiple surgeries and limited mobility led to weight gain beginning in her 30s. In 1970, she nearly died from pneumonia and required a tracheotomy that left a permanent scar on her neck. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, she battled respiratory illnesses, addiction to pain medication and alcohol, and ongoing physical pain. These medical struggles changed her appearance gradually but significantly. Her once smooth complexion became puffy, her jawline softened, and her famously slim figure fluctuated dramatically. In 1997, Taylor had surgery to remove a benign brain tumor, again limiting her mobility. Coupled with chronic pain, this caused further weight gain that transformed her silhouette completely. Photographs from her last decades reveal a woman whose eyes still flash that trademark violet spark, but whose features have softened and shifted well beyond what audiences remember. Fans used to her beauty on the screen were often shocked by the contrast. 8. Judy Garland, when the rainbow faded. Judy Garland's transformation from a fresh-faced girl who sang over the rainbow to the haggard, prematurely aged woman who died at 47 represents one of Hollywood's most devastating beauty tragedies. The tragedy wasn't simply that Garland aged poorly, but that her physical decline so clearly revealed the ruthless exploitation of young talent in the studio era. At 16, when she appeared in The Wizard of Oz, Garland radiated health and sweetness. Her expressive brown eyes, creamy complexion, and open smile projected a wholesome prettiness far more relatable than the sultry glamour of stars like Ava Gardner or Rita Hayworth. She looked like the proverbial girl next door, who just so happened to possess one of the greatest voices in American entertainment. Under normal circumstances, Garland's beauty would have matured on its own as she grew into adulthood. Instead, she entered the industry during an era when studios exerted suffocating control over every detail of their stars' lives, and MGM's obsessive micromanaging of her appearance marked the beginning of her decline. The studio executives started attacking her body almost immediately, nicknaming her names that no young girl should ever hear and demanding weight loss. In an attempt to force her into their standards, MGM doctors prescribed amphetamines to suppress her appetite and keep her working at an unceasing pace. When the drugs made her unable to sleep, they gave her barbiturates. By her early 20s, Garland was caught in a path of destruction due to uppers and downers that ruined her physical and emotional health. Photos from her mid-20s showed dark circles under her eyes, a forced tightness in her smile, and fluctuating weight as she swung between drug-induced thinness and rebound weight gain that came whenever she tried to stop. By the time MGM fired her in 1950, she was only 28, yet her face and body already carried deep marks of strain. The 1950s brought dazzling comebacks and devastating collapses. Garland's triumphant performances at the Palace Theater in 1951 briefly restored her glow, but constant battles with addiction, emotional turmoil, and professional pressure kept eroding her appearance. During A Star is Born in 1954, makeup artists worked overtime to present a version of Garland that no longer existed off-screen. As the decade wore on, the toll became harder to hide. Her youthful softness disappeared, replaced by a pinched, anxious look. Her eyes, once so warm and expressive, often appeared swollen, tired, or desperate. Her most visible decline took place in the 1960s. Footage from her 1963 to 64 television series showed a woman who appeared 20 years older than her actual age. Her face clearly showed the strain of many years of stimulant use. According to her current drug cycle, she was alternately painfully thin or bloated and unhealthy. Even her famous voice sounded gruff, carrying the rasp of years of exhaustion. But perhaps the saddest change was in her eyes. As a young woman, Garland's eyes shone with sincerity, humor, and a disconcerting emotional honesty. In her 40s, they revealed pain, resolve, and the deep weariness that must have emanated from the soul itself. Even critics suggested that as her body betrayed her, her eyes blazed with a fierce, haunting brilliance unlike anything found in her early years. By the time Garland died at 47 from an accidental overdose of barbiturates, the coroner remarked that her body resembled that of a woman in her 70s. Her decline had not been natural. It had been engineered. 9. Mae West, the caricature of eternal youth. Mae West constructed a career upon an image Hollywood had never seen. With her curvaceous figure, enticing one-liners, and confident insinuations, she became the archetype of audacious, uncompromising sex. By studio standards in the 1930s, West was not conventionally beautiful. Well into her 40s by the time she reached superstardom, West exuded a mature sensuality that was beyond her younger contemporaries, Loretta Young and Claudette Colbert. Her platinum hair, dramatic features, and exaggerated contours were all part of a contrived persona, depending more on presence than perfection. Because this persona was already artificial, it seemed at first that West might defy the usual struggles actresses faced as they aged. Unlike stars, whose appeal depended on youthful beauty, West's image rested on stylization and performance. But instead of allowing her screen persona to evolve with time, she attempted to freeze herself at her peak. She refused to acknowledge aging at all. In her 50s, she still dressed, posed, and performed exactly as she had in her 40s. By her 60s and 70s, the illusion began to strain. Heavy makeup no longer enhanced, it obscured. Her platinum hair, now maintained through obvious wigs, clashed with increasingly delicate skin. Corsets and padding were required to maintain her iconic figure. By the time she returned to filmmaking in Myra Breckinridge, 1970, at age 77, and Sextet, 1978, at age 85, the contradiction between her image and her age had become impossible to avoid. 10. Jean Seberg, When Persecution Destroys Beauty. Jean Seberg came to Hollywood unknown and left an overnight international icon. With her pixie cut, fragile features, and the modern understated charm, she was a new kind of beauty, starkly contrasting with the heavily stylized glamour of former decades. In breathless 1960, she was the cool. It took just a bit of makeup to enhance such luminous skin and striking bones. Her short hair accentuated the natural elegance and independence. The emergence of Seberg captured not only a cinematic moment, but helped define an aesthetic that influenced fashion for decades. Yet the same delicacy that made her so captivating also hinted at emotional vulnerability. Her intelligent, searching eyes suggested sensitivity beneath her confidence. These qualities became dangerous weaknesses when Seberg attracted the attention of the FBI. Her support for civil rights and the Black Panther Party infuriated J. Edgar Hoover, who launched an aggressive campaign to destroy her reputation. The darkest moment came in 1970, when agents planted a false story claiming she was pregnant with a child of a Black Panther activist. Seberg was already in a fragile emotional state. The humiliation triggered premature labor, and her baby girl died 2 days after birth. In a heartbreaking act of defiance, Seberg held an open casket funeral to expose the lie. This trauma marked the beginning of her visible decline. In her early 30s, she still possessed her natural beauty, but her expressions grew strained and anxious. The casual joy that once animated her face was replaced by tension and sadness. Over the next decade, her mental health worsened. She became paranoid, convinced she was being watched and followed, fears that would later be proved correct. Alcohol and medication dependency followed, taking their toll on both body and face. Her once slender figure turned bloated. Flawless skin grew flushed and uneven, and the light in her eyes dimmed, overtaken by a haunted, faraway expression. By her late 30s, Seberg appeared decades older than her age. Her movements seemed unsteady, her speech sometimes rambling, and her emotional state fragile. Once in demand by directors around the world, she became difficult to hire. Her financial difficulties mounted alongside her stress, accelerating her decline. In August 1979, Seberg disappeared. 9 days later, she was found dead in her car, likely as a result of a combination of alcohol and barbiturates. She was only 40, but photographs from her final year show a woman whose beauty had been whittled away by a decade of relentless emotional assault. Here it is, rewritten cleanly in paragraphs, with no special formatting. 11. Susan Hayward's beauty was defined by strength, intensity, and a radiant presence that made her one of Hollywood's most compelling stars. With her vivid red hair, flawless skin, and striking features, she fit perfectly into the dramatic women's films of the 1940s and 1950s. Her performances in I Wanna Live, I'll Cry Tomorrow, and With a Song in My Heart earned her widespread acclaim and 5 Academy Award nominations. Hayward was not just a beauty. She was a force, equally respected for her talent and her determination. Her aging process began smoothly, and through her late 40s and early 50s, she remained a commanding, attractive presence. In another life, she might have shifted gracefully into character roles, just as Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn did. But fate intervened in a way no one could have predicted. Her skin turned sallow, her weight dropped dramatically, and her bright, vibrant presence slowly dimmed as the disease attacked her nervous system. For a woman who had always defined herself by her beauty, this was emotionally devastating. She became more and more reclusive, allowing only old friends and family to see her, often in a dark room, her head scarf-bound. The last time she would appear in public was at the 1974 Academy Awards, and even the kind lighting couldn't shield how far gone she was. She died in 1975 at age 57, a once brilliant beauty, shrunken by an unseen foe. 12. Clara Bow didn't just have it, she defined it. The original it girl of the 1920s. She embodied a new, thrilling kind of American beauty. With her expressive eyes, lively movements, red bobbed hair, and irresistible Cupid's bow smile, she exuded an authenticity that set her apart from the carefully groomed stars of the silent era. Her energy leapt off the screen. She was modern, accessible, and electric. Her appeal wasn't about perfection, but about life. That vitality made her the biggest box office draw of the late 1920s, beloved by millions, copied by young women everywhere, and admired by critics and writers alike. But beneath the vibrant persona was a woman shaped by trauma. Clara grew up in poverty, experiencing neglect, abuse, and extreme emotional stress long before she was a star. Fame masked her wounds, but never cured them. When the talkies arrived, Bow did make successful sound films, but the technical demands raised her anxiety. Microphones, strict timing, and precise dialogue deprived her of spontaneity, which had been her greatest strength. As the pressure mounted, her mental health declined. She grew insomnia, visible exhaustion, fluctuating weight, and nervous habits that made her appear increasingly strained. The wide-eyed flapper, whose face once shone bright with joy, now looking worried and taut. In 1931, Bow suffered a public breakdown at only 26. Photos from the time show a shocking transformation. The sparkle gone from her eyes, her expressions guarded, her youthful glow replaced with sadness. After a short attempt to return to film, she retired in 1933 at just 28, seeking peace on a Nevada ranch with her husband, Rex Bell. She lived reclusively, seeing almost no one, and faded from public memory long before her death in 1965 at age 60. But her tragedy wasn't just that she lost her beauty. It was the extinguishing of the inner spark that had once made her extraordinary.